Russia has warned of the end of the world if Trump follows through on his promise to take Greenland. This comes after Germany, Sweden, France and Norway deployed troops for joint exercises with Denmark. Trump has repeatedly stated that anything less than US control of the island is unacceptable.
Germany is sending troops to Greenland. A small reconnaissance unit from the Bundeswehr have left for Karup in Denmark, from where they will travel to Nuuk, the Greenlandic capital. The soldiers will be on the ground for a few days, and Germany's defense minister said the team were deployed at Denmark's request. The ministry added that the German team would join small units from other NATO countries on a civilian flight from Denmark to Greenland.
Denmark and NATO are really ramping up their presence here in Greenland. Overnight, the Danish military flew in a C-130 Hercules transport aircraft here into Nuuk. They're increasing their military presence, they say, because of rising security tensions. The French are sending troops here. They say they're coming to join an ongoing Arctic military exercise. The Finns are also sending troops here. They are going to be looking at training possibilities. That's how the Finns are describing it.
Breaking. Tensions are rising tonight in the Arctic region as NATO forces arrive in Greenland in what is being described as a joint military deployment. The move comes amid growing uncertainty following recent statements from the United States that raised questions about future intentions in the region. The arrival of NATO troops has drawn global attention, especially after reactions linked to former United States President Donald Trump began circulating widely, with many observers describing visible surprise at the speed and scale of the response. Greenland, an autonomous territory within the Kingdom of Denmark, has long held strategic importance due to its location between North America and Europe. It also sits near key Arctic shipping routes and contains valuable natural resources. For decades, the region has been monitored closely by military planners, but large-scale joint deployments have been relatively rare. This latest move signals a shift from quiet observation to visible coordination. NATO officials have confirmed that forces from multiple member countries are participating in the deployment. The stated purpose is to conduct joint readiness operations, strengthen regional security, and ensure stability in the Arctic. Equipment, personnel, and logistical units have reportedly arrived in stages, with more expected. In the coming days, the presence is being described as defensive in nature, with an emphasis on cooperation rather than confrontation. The timing of the deployment is what has raised eyebrows. It follows strong language from the United States regarding Arctic influence, security responsibilities, and strategic interests. While no formal military threat was issued, the statements were enough to trigger concern among allies. Analysts warn that even rhetorical pressure in sensitive regions can prompt rapid responses when trust is fragile. Reactions connected to Donald Trump have added another layer of attention. Sources close to the situation say the speed of NATO coordination was unexpected. Greenland has been mentioned before in discussions about geopolitical leverage, but the arrival of a joint force ahead of any direct action marks a notable escalation in signaling, rather than conflict. Denmark has emphasized that the deployment is being conducted in full cooperation with Greenland's local authorities. Officials have stated that there is no loss of sovereignty and no emergency situation on the ground. Instead, they frame the move as precautionary, aimed at ensuring that any misunderstanding or miscalculation is avoided. In a region that is becoming increasingly important. The Arctic is changing rapidly. Melting ice is opening new sea routes, reducing travel times between major markets. Energy exploration is expanding, and competition over resources is increasing. As a result, military planners are paying closer attention to the region than ever before. NATO has repeatedly stated that it must adapt to these changes to protect member states and maintain balance. From a military perspective, Greenland offers critical advantages. Its location allows monitoring of air and sea traffic across the North Atlantic. Early warning systems, radar installations, and logistical hubs in the region can influence global defense planning. This is why any hint of unilateral action tends to trigger multilateral responses. Analysts warn that this situation could increase the risk of misinterpretation. While NATO says the deployment is defensive, any military movement can be viewed differently depending on perspective. The presence of joint forces could be seen as reassurance by allies, but as provocation by others. This delicate balance is why communication remains critical. Markets are also watching closely. While Greenland itself has a small economy, stability in the Arctic affects global trade, energy prices, and insurance costs for shipping routes. Even minor disruptions or uncertainty can ripple outward, investors tend to react not just to events, but to the possibility of escalation. For the United States, the situation presents a complex challenge. On one hand, it remains a leading member of NATO. On the other, strong unilateral statements can create friction within alliances that rely on consensus. Analysts warn that alliance dynamics are tested not only by actions, but by tone and timing. Public reaction has been mixed. Some view the NATO deployment as a necessary show of unity and preparedness. Others worry that increased military presence could accelerate tensions in a region that has largely avoided direct confrontation. Social media discussions reflect both reassurance and unease, with many questioning how quickly. Strategic competition is expanding into new areas. The role of Greenland's local population is also being discussed. Residents have historically balanced represents. It suggests that global actors are willing and able to respond quickly to perceived pressure, even before concrete actions are taken. Looking ahead, much depends on what happens next. Will the deployment remain temporary? Will diplomatic channels be used to clarify intentions? Will future statements be more measured? Analysts warn that the next phase will matter more than the initial headlines. For now, NATO forces remain in Greenland, the Arctic remains in focus, and the world is paying close attention. What happens in this remote region could influence how power, cooperation, and security are managed in an era of rapid change. And the question for viewers tonight is this: as strategic competition moves into new regions, can visible military unity preserve peace, or does it risk making fragile areas even more tense? The situation in Greenland continues to develop as attention shifts from the initial arrival of NATO forces to the broader consequences this move could carry. While no direct confrontation has occurred, the presence of a joint army in such a sensitive region is changing how governments, analysts, and citizens think about the Arctic. What once felt distant and frozen is now clearly part of global power calculations. NATO officials continue to emphasize that the deployment is coordinated, defensive, and temporary. They point to joint training exercises, logistical cooperation, and readiness planning as the main goals. The message being sent is one of unity rather than aggression. Still, analysts warn that intentions are not always received as intended, especially in regions where history, resources, and security overlap. Greenland's strategic importance cannot be overstated. Its location places it at the crossroads of transatlantic air and sea routes. Military planners value the region for early warning capabilities and monitoring potential threats moving between continents. As Arctic ice melts, these routes are becoming more accessible, increasing both commercial interest and security concerns. This could mean that Greenland will play a much larger role in future defense planning than it has in the past. Denmark has worked carefully to balance alliance obligations with respect for Greenland's autonomy. Officials stress that local authorities were informed and involved, and that there is no plan for permanent expansion of military infrastructure without consent. Even so, some residents have expressed quiet concern about becoming a focal point of global tension. Environmental impact, cultural preservation, and local decision-making remain sensitive issues. The United States finds itself in a complicated position. As a leading NATO member, it is part of the joint force now operating in Greenland. At the same time, recent rhetoric has raised concerns among allies about unilateral pressure and strategic unpredictability. Analysts warn that mixed signals can strain alliances, even when formal cooperation continues. Reactions linked to Donald Trump have fueled public discussion. The narrative of shock reflects how quickly the situation shifted from words to action. It also highlights how alliances can respond collectively when they sense uncertainty. The speed of coordination is being seen by some as a message that alliance structures remain strong and responsive. From a global perspective, other powers are watching closely. The Arctic is not only of interest to NATO members. Countries outside the alliance are expanding research, shipping, and strategic presence in northern regions. Any sign of increased militarization could prompt counter moves, even if none are announced publicly. Analysts warn that silent competition can be just as influential as open rivalry. Economic implications are also being debated. While Greenland itself is not a major industrial hub, the stability of Arctic routes affects global trade. Shipping companies calculate risk based on security conditions, insurance costs, and political stability. Even the perception of rising tension can lead to higher costs, which eventually reach consumers. Energy markets are another factor. The Arctic holds significant untapped resources, and interest in exploration has grown as technology improves. Military presence does not automatically lead to extraction, but it changes the strategic environment around these resources. This could mean future negotiations over access and regulation become more complex and politically charged. Analysts warn that the biggest risk is not immediate conflict but gradual normalization of military buildup. When deployments become routine, it becomes harder to reverse them. Exercises turn into permanent rotations and temporary facilities become lasting installations. History shows that such shifts often happen slowly, without a single decisive moment. Supporters of NATO's move argue the opposite. They say visibility prevents miscalculation. Clear presence, they argue, reduces the chance that any actor will test boundaries or attempt sudden changes. From this view, preparedness is a form of stability, not escalation. Public opinion across NATO countries remains divided. Some citizens feel reassured by coordinated defense efforts. Others worry that expanding military footprints distract from diplomacy and climate cooperation in the Arctic. The region is already under pressure from environmental change, and added military activity raises questions about priorities. Communication will be critical in the coming weeks. Diplomatic channels between allies, as well as with non-allied Arctic stakeholders, may determine whether this moment cools down or intensifies. Analysts warn that silence or vague messaging can create space for rumors and misinterpretation. Greenland itself may face long-term choices as a result of this attention. Increased strategic interest can bring investment and infrastructure, but it can also bring dependency and external pressure. Local leaders will likely face difficult decisions about how to balance opportunity with autonomy. The broader lesson may be about how power is exercised in a changing world. Strategic competition is no longer limited to traditional borders or battlefields. It now includes climate-affected regions, supply routes, and even scientific research zones. This could mean future disputes emerge in places once considered neutral or remote. For NATO, the deployment is also a test of internal unity. Acting together strengthens credibility, but managing differences within the alliance remains a challenge. Analysts warn that unity requires constant maintenance, especially when political leadership changes and national priorities shift. As attention moves beyond the initial headlines, the key question becomes sustainability. How long will forces remain? How will success be measured? And how will tensions be reduced rather than prolonged? Without clear answers, uncertainty may linger. The situation in Greenland shows how quickly global dynamics can shift. A region shaped by ice and isolation is now central to debates about security, cooperation, and influence. The arrival of NATO forces has turned abstract strategy into visible reality. As viewers watch this story unfold, one question remains especially important. In a world where even the most remote regions are drawn into global rivalry, how can cooperation keep pace with competition without letting tension define the future?